Hello and welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Yetmir Yashari and I will be your moderator for today's webinar, Managing AI Risks and Cyber Resilience, a joint approach with ISO 22301 and ISO IEC 42001. We're excited to discuss this topic and be joined by our esteemed speakers today, Ms. Rinske Geerlings and Ms. Natalie Klaas. Before we get started, I'd like to inform the audience that this session is being recorded and will be posted on our website and YouTube channel, along with the slides of this presentation. Furthermore, we encourage you to participate by submitting your questions at any time using the Q&A feature in the chat box. Now, without further ado, let's get started. I'm going to hand it over to our first speaker, Natalie.
Thank you, Yetmir. Hi, everybody, and welcome again at the webinar. Rinske and myself are very happy to be hosting this webinar. So let's start with a short introduction from ourselves. Rinske, I would like to ask you to introduce yourself first.
Sure, thank you very much, Natalie. We're both very excited. We had a great pre-webinar session, and we can't wait to share our ideas with you this day. So welcome, everyone. My name is Rinske. I'm based in Australia, but at the moment I'm on the National Independence and Special Celebration Day here in Vietnam. So I'm traveling usually quite a lot, and this is one of the examples. I do a lot of business continuity when I travel, and also information security and risk management kind of programs. More recently around boards and senior leadership to understand impacts of AI and also cyber, to speak the language of people who have technical knowledge and the other way around, of course. So yeah, combined with that, some of the ISO standards and I'm excited to hear Natalie's views also on AI from a different perspective. So we're going to combine the technical / management side, as well as the business continuity and resilience impacts.
Okay, thank you, Rinske. And for myself, I'm Natalie Klaas. I'm based in Belgium, probably the smallest country in Europe, with most of the languages that we speak, or at least the national languages that we speak. I also have an own company where I support organizations with mainly risk management, governance questions related to information security, quality management, and data privacy. The other time that I have left, which is not a lot, I'm also an external auditor for ISO 27001 and 9001. And recently, I also started working on AI compliance and AI risk management. So I'm very happy to be able to introduce some of the concepts on AI risk management throughout the webinar. So both Rinske and myself, we welcome a very interactive webinar. So as Yetmir already announced, please feel free to ask some questions in the chat. We will be monitoring the chat, and as will Yetmir, of course. And if there are any pertinent questions that arise during the presentation, please feel free to add them and to ask Yetmir to ask them straight away, and then we'll pause. At the end of the webinar, there will also be time, 10 to 15 minutes, depending how interactive you guys are during the webinar, to ask questions and to get some answers from our side. So to already start, so quickly run through the agenda on what will be discussed today. So obviously we'll be talking a little bit about organizational resilience and about ISO 42001 and related to that to AI risk management. So that will be my part, and after that Rinske will take over and we will be talking about ISO 22301, business continuity and operational resilience, and then of course the Q&A. But to start already on a pretty interactive note, just a quick question, and we'll give you a couple of seconds to answer. What do you guys think? Artificial intelligence, is it an opportunity or is it not? Do you consider it as a threat? What do you see in your organizations with relation to artificial intelligence? Please feel free to tap your answer in the chat. I'm looking at the chat right now to see if I see some answers coming up. I see a little bit of a mix of opportunity and threats coming through. So yeah, indeed, I think as well, it can be both sides of the coin, and that's why we need to have some serious and due diligence risk management approach in place to consider if artificial intelligence is an opportunity or if it's a threat to the organization. But how do you do that? Risk management is a pretty broad team. So how do you tackle that? Because we all know risk management from the ISO 27001. Is it actually the same thing, or how do we need to consider that? That's what we will guide you through to start with, if my presentation works with me. So first of all, let's have a look at what organizational resilience is. Now, if we look at organizational resilience, which is a definition that comes from the ISO 22316, it basically says it's the ability of an organization to really absorb and to adapt to changes in the environment, to changes that have an impact on the relation, on the organization, and that have an impact on the ability to deliver the objectives and to survive within that environment. So more resilient organizations really anticipate on changes, on threats and opportunities that arise in changes in environment, and those changes can be sudden or gradual. And looking at the artificial intelligence threat or opportunity, whether that's how you want to look at it. It might be perceived as pretty sudden. If I talk to a lot of people say, like, all of a sudden ChatGPT was out there and we could do a lot of things with artificial intelligence, and before that we weren't really aware about artificial intelligence. While that's not really the case, because it's already pretty old. It basically goes back to the 50s. But anyhow, that resilience should be or can be a strategic organizational goal to ensure that your business can continue to thrive even when organizations change, when environments change, so that you really bounce back from things that happen. Of course, an organization's resilience is influenced by that unique interaction of those strategic and operational factors. So there's no one size fit all. It's really dependent on the type of organization that you are, what your level of resilience should be. Looking, for example, at a hospital, we would expect that they are pretty resilient when they have, for example, a power outage, to stay in the topics of today's and yesterday's news. We want them to be resilient, but it might be for other companies that a power outage of 1 hour or 3 hours is not such a big thing. So those are the things that you really need to consider. Now, when looking at artificial intelligence, we have obviously the ISO 42001 standard, which was published in 2023 already. So December 2023, this was published. And it basically specifies the requirements for establishing, implementing, maintaining, and improving an artificial intelligence management system within an organization. Like all other ISO standards related to ISO management system standard, it follows the same harmonized structure. So that means that chapters 4 until 10 are the same as you would read an ISO 9000 or an ISO 27001, with some specific adjustments related to artificial intelligence. As in all other ISO standards, all the requirements are expressed with the verb shall, and we all know that that is something that needs to be in place. And for this standard, organizations can obtain certification. That being said, at the moment, there are not a lot of certification bodies that are already accredited to do these type of certifications. But I know, at least in Belgium and the Netherlands, there are a couple of certification bodies that are working on getting that accreditation. So that's soon to come in Europe as well. I have no idea how it, and perhaps Rinske can talk a little bit about that in Asia and Australia, if they're already accreditations being published there. But at the moment, a lot of organizations are already looking at the standards and seeing how they can implement this in organizations, especially with the European AI Act that has come into place as well, and which will become into force in 2026. When you go through the EU AI Act, if you have the patience to read the 400 or 500 pages and look at the ISO standard, you will see that there is a lot of overlap or a lot of things that are already in place in the standard that will help you achieve that compliance with the European Artificial Intelligence Act. So looking at the management system, we can now move to the ISO 42005, which basically guides organizations in assessing the impact of AI systems to really determine what are potential effects of artificial intelligence on individuals, on organizations, but also on society as a whole. So that's, as you know, very important to understand how is artificial intelligence being used, and is there bias? How can we really proactively already decide on what will be the impact? So this standard, which is currently being developed, so you cannot buy it yet, it's still in draft, but they're currently writing on this standard. It will provide some guidance on how you should document an AI system impact assessment. But that's how things go, either in the 42001, but also in the European Artificial Intelligence Act. There are a lot of statements like you need to do a risk assessment or a system impact assessment, but how do you do that? What should be documented? What is expected? So that ISO standard 42005 will help you with that. The standard is applicable for all types of organizations, whether they are developing, providing, or using artificial intelligence systems. For this standard, no certification can be obtained. In line with risk management, it's also very important that we talk briefly on the ISO 23894, which gives basically a guidance for managing AI risks. So they look at AI risk management activities and AI risk management principles, and to embed them in AI related activities and functions, which is pretty important. As you know, risk management is not something that should be done from out of an ivory tower or from in a basement somewhere. You should include that risk management activities in all relevant activities and business processes. So also this standard can be used in all types of organizations. It doesn't matter how big or how small they are, or it doesn't matter in which industry they are, but you also cannot obtain certification against this standard. So let's dive a little bit deeper into the risk management of artificial intelligence. We also need to talk about an artificial intelligence risk management framework that NIST has created, which is basically divided in two parts, which the first part is really intended on framing the AI risk, where the second part, and really the core framework, defines key functions, which are 4 key functions: govern, map, measure, and manage, where we have different categories and subcategories to help. So it's kind of an open source framework. It's developed collaboratively, and you can download it freely on the NIST website for now. You can find the framework itself. You can find Excel templates that already can be used to make your first steps into that risk management. But before you start using the templates that you can find on the internet, let's see what that risk management is all about. Now, when we look again at that ISO 23894, you see that there is a notion of a couple of principles of AI risk management. So looking at those principles, there are a couple of things that you need to keep in mind, because artificial intelligence tends to be very entwined and tangled with all other business processes. It should speak for itself that risk management of those AI principles, of those AI processes, should be integrated in your normal day-to-day and business activities. It's not something that happens on the side, but it should really be embedded in the DNA of the organization, and should really be incorporated in your day-to-day business. An AI risk management procedure or process should be structured and comprehensive. As an auditor, I have the chance to see a lot of different types of risk management processes and procedures. And the more Excel guru the person is that's sitting in front of me, the more complicated the formulas get, and the way the risk management procedure looks like. But try to keep it as simple as possible, in the sense that if somebody else would perform the same risk management process with the instructions that you give them, that you would get the same outcome. It should be as simple as that. As soon as you start using a lot of different formulas, a lot of different categories, it becomes very complicated and it's no longer comprehensive. So people find it very difficult to reproduce the same outcome. As well, there is no one size fits all. AI risk management should be customized to the specific AI use or development within the organization. There's no one organization that looks like the same. Every organization has its own culture, their own way of working. So customize your AI risk management. That does not mean that you can't use already templates and things that are available out there, but try to tweak them so it's suitable for your organization. As I already stated, risk management is not something that you do out of an ivory tower or from out of a dungeon. You should include all the relevant stakeholders around the table to get a 360 view on the threats and opportunities that AI pose for your organization or for the business process that you are analyzing. It's also a dynamic process. It's not because you do a risk assessment today that in 6 months' time the risks are still the same, especially in the field of artificial intelligence. It's a field that changes on a constant basis, although we are usually in a field like IT or security that is already at a pretty hefty pace of change. The artificial intelligence field even changes more swiftly. So your risk management approach should be dynamic as well, so that it allows you to quickly interact with those changes. You always work on best available information. You look at historical data, you look at what any data that you have in front, and nobody of us, and if people do have that, and nobody has like a crystal ball to predict the future, but you cannot predict the future. So you look at historical data, you look a little bit at your gut feeling, things that happened already, and that is what you include in your risk assessment, of course. And of course, you look at the culture that you have in your organization and the people that you have in your organization. You also take that into account, especially within artificial intelligence, the human oversight, the fact that people today use many different forms of artificial intelligence and are not always completely trained in what is the best way to do that. So you need to take that into consideration as well. And as with all ISO standards, of course, you continually improve your risk management process throughout the period of time and throughout the years that you're working with that. So the purpose of that risk management framework is really to assist the organization in integrating those activities, those risk management activities, in those relevant processes and procedures, functions within the organization. So you really get all the information that you need to make decisions. So it's really something that business should be involved with, and to really get that insight on what are the decisions that we need to take. Is it an opportunity or is it a threat? And while they basically oversee, that governing body oversees the whole risk management process, obviously they can delegate the decision-making process to the identifying and the assessing to other parties within the organization. Now, when looking at risks, you can, of course, look at different risk sources. So there are a lot of risk sources, and you can find them as either in the 23894 or in 42001. Annex C really gives you a good oversight on a couple of risk sources that you should consider, whether you're developing or using artificial intelligence, and we will walk briefly through them. So first of all, you need to look at the complexity of your environment. When they are working in a very complex environments, there is a range of situations that can happen. There's a huge uncertainty that can happen. There can be uncertainty on performance, there can be uncertainty on outcome. So you need to look at the complexity of the environment. Is it interacting with other systems? So you need to take that into account. Another risk source is, of course, the lack of transparency and explainability. That's what everybody afraid of. And artificial intelligence is by a lot of people perceived as a black box. So it needs to be clear that you need to be able to explain how an algorithm works, how you come to a certain outcome, because you want people to trust the artificial intelligence. So you need to think about certain risk sources that are related to the lack of that transparency and that explainability. Of course, the level of automation that you have within the system also includes certain risks, and they can be related to fairness, but also to physical safety and security. So you need to have a thought about that. Risk sources related to specific machine learning. Of course, the quality of the data which you train your machine learning, which you train your model, is very important. So you need to take into account how robust is that data. Are there issues with data quality? What about data poisoning? Is the data correct? Is it incorrect? Is there a certain bias in there? So you need to think about data. Of course, there's also some hardware issues. You still need to think about specific hardware components that might contain certain risks. And then looking at the full life cycle of an artificial intelligence system, going from inception all the way to the decommissioning, there might be some risks related to that as well. What if you don't maintain? What if you don't update your system? What if you don't deploy adequately? What if you decommission in a wrong way? So you need to think about those risks as well. And then, of course, lastly, because of the changing environment and the fact that the artificial intelligence field changes at a very rapid pace, you also need to take into account that you might be working with less mature technology because you don't know what the system limitations are. You might be faced with performance drift. So you might need to think about that as well, but also looking at the more mature technology, looking at technology complacency. So there are a couple of risk sources that you really need to take into account. Again, these are the risk sources that are stated in the 42001 ISO standard. You might come up with a couple of other ones. The human factor is not included here, but also think about, okay, what if people are not trained enough, or if people get interfaces with other systems, how do they need to interact as well? So you really need to take these risk sources and think about other risk sources that are applicable for your specific organization. Linked with those risk sources, it's obviously very important, as it is as well in ISO 27001, that you identify the assets that are related to both the design and the use of artificial intelligence. So understanding what are those assets, both tangible and intangible, is very important to really get that full end-to-end view. So as some examples, I've created some examples of assets because I see it a lot in audits that people tend to look at the very tangible assets because those are the things that you can touch and that you understand, but also think about intellectual property like AI-related patents, trade secrets, copyrighted AI-generated content, but also data sets and models that are proprietary. Human resources and what are trainers for AI development, the specific skill set that you need. It's a skill set that is highly in demand, but pretty scarce at the moment. So how do you handle those assets, but also those third-party risks that you need to take into account? So looking at those separate from the data sets, the infrastructure, but also the audit trails and the bias, the documentation that you need to take into account. So looking at this, it's already a pretty elaborate set of assets that you can use to think about specific risks that are associated to those assets. Now, when you have the assets identified, you have the risks sources identified, you also need to think about, okay, what are possible or potential events that could happen and what could be the outcome of those. So because artificial intelligence is still a pretty young field, there are not a lot of use cases available there. So you can use those, obviously, but you can also use published standards, published specifications, market data, simulations, interviews. So you need to do a little bit of a research to really understand what are potential events and potential outcomes. And as an example, I've already created a couple of them, looking at the different phases within the AI development and use phase, but also in external factors. So when looking at development phase, you can obviously have data quality issues, which lead to a biased model, which then leads to reputational harm. If you're using unauthorized data sets, it might lead to regulatory fines, but also trust issues. In the use phase, if you use unauthorized AI, you can have potential data breaches or data misuse, which can then lead to lawsuits or fines. If you look at the third-party risk, there might be in your supply chain some AI failures, which might lead to service disruption and third-party liabilities. So you need to think about, based on the asset, on the risk sources, looking at the complete life cycle. If you're only using AI, you obviously need to think on the use, maintenance, and external factors. So you really need to think about what is applicable for my organization. But then you can also think, okay, what is the outcome? What is the impact on my organization? To really take that into account. And if you have then identified the consequences, you can then translate it in either monetary consequences, but also opportunities that are gained or lost, or even threats to health or safety of individuals, work time that is gained, that is lost. So you really need to take care to really identify any differences between groups who experience the benefits, because benefit for one is always a negative consequence for somebody else and vice versa. So you really, when you're doing the AI risk assessment, you really need to identify those both differences based on the risk sources and events that can lead to risks. And once you've done that, you obviously need to think about what are the controls that we need to implement, both on the development and the use of artificial intelligence. And those controls, as we do with 27001, we need to document them and we need to implement them in a correct way, obviously appropriately based to the risk and so forth. So you also need to check the controls that you've implemented. It's not because today a control is really effective for a certain threat or a certain risk that you have, that in 6 months' time the same control is still applicable, due to the fact that AI is changing so quickly. So identification and implementation of controls is the last step. So risk analysis, looking at, and as a summary, looking at risk analysis, you basically look at the likelihood of events. You do the analysis of what are potential events and consequences, and you think about what is the likelihood that something like that would happen. You then think about what is the impact of that in the organization, and what would then the impact be? Would it be an impact on people? Would it be an impact on systems? You look at also complexity and connectivity of that AI system and time-related factors that are related to that. And then, of course, looking at the controls that you already have in place, how effective are they in mitigating the risks that you currently occur. And of course, you look at the sensitivity confidence level of the data of the AI system that you have in place. And then, and this is the bridge to Rinske, you will also need to assess those consequences. And you really need to do a business impact assessment, an impact assessment for individuals, and an impact assessment for society. So when you look at that business impact analysis, you need to determine what is the degree to which the organization is affected, and you need to look at what is the criticality of that impact and what is the tangible and non-tangible impact, and what would you use as a criteria to establish that overall impact. Rinske, over to you.
Thank you, Natalie. Yeah. Very interesting content so far already, and especially as with risk management, we always tend to kind of originally think, and also in ISO 27001, think about preventative controls, you know, like how to reduce the chance that things go wrong. Whereas in business continuity and operational resilience and business impact analysis, we tend to think when things have gone wrong, what is then the plan? What are the impacts? What can we do then? So that's where I'll concentrate quite a lot of my content. What I'll concentrate on is not so much the pre-incident, the technical kind of controls to reduce likelihood, but also look at impact reduction. So next slide, please. So let's have a look at operational resilience and business continuity. There's a couple of standards around. Quite a few of you out there, of your 1,200 that are logged in, and we do want your comments, by the way. The main standard that we all know for decades almost is the ISO 22301, so the Business Continuity Management Standard. And the definition that is used there for business continuity is the capability of an organization to continue delivery of products and services within acceptable timeframes at predefined capacity during a disruption. Now, there's already a couple of challenging words in there, especially in the context of AI and cyber risk, because acceptable timeframes, predefined capacity. I mean, we're talking about a world that we don't even know any historic, any real data on when things majorly go wrong, for example, in AI, or how to make sure that we have certain controls in place for AI management and for cyber risk that actually prevent or reduce certain ongoing knock-on effects. So when we have a lot of historic information, for example, on some of the risks that Natalie was highlighting in the beginning, you know, more like environmental risk, things like power outages, floods, fires, it's a lot easier to analyze that information from the past and then decide, for example, which controls shall I choose? What's a good return on investment? What's a wise investment? But let's compare that with the world of AI, and I'm pulling cyber risk in there as well, because there's always a new surprise in that context as well, and they're linked to some degree. So let's then step into that world and try to really justify your investment in certain controls. I mean, it's really a crystal ball situation that unfortunately none of us have. So you need to focus, in my view, more and more on that impact reduction, because on the pre-incident controls, you know, like reduction of likelihood, there's so much uncertainty around this. I always give the example of something like ransomware. When that first piped up, I don't have any clients that I work with that said, yeah, I had that in my risk register. Now, let's just move into the world of AI. You know, when AI majorly goes wrong, or when there's a contractual situation happening where AI has been one of the creators of content, and for example, it's incorrect, or you get legal, like Natalie was saying, you get legal issues around it. How do you quickly analyze that? What is the impact reduction? Likelihood reduction, even worse, even harder, but impact reduction, yeah, how do you even tackle that? So we're going to jump in. It's not all bad. We're going to jump into some solutions soon, and at least some thinking directions. And I'd love to hear from everyone in the chat, of course, as well. So next slide.
Oh.
Operational resilience. I've highlighted this one because Matt was talking about organizational resilience, which has its own standard, actually, the ISO 22316. But this one, the operational resilience side, so more looking at keeping your current business going with the right people, systems, physical assets, supply chain. That's actually becoming a more popular term, also in Australia and Asia. And you're asking about that, Nat. In that context, yeah, we do see operational resilience becoming a more topical kind of subject. There's even a new training course with PCB for that, and you can see that's the lead operational resilience manager. Whilst organizational resilience as a broader concept, that standard I find in the regions where I work is not that popular for some reason. People refer to definitions sometimes for it, but they don't actually really go, okay, let me implement it. Whereas this topic of operational resilience is becoming really, it's moving with really fast speed, because there's some regulatory requirements coming up or that have come up recently. And I'll move into that soon. So what is operational resilience? It refers to an entity's capacity to endure and rebound from various disruptive events. They can cover a broad spectrum: man-made, cyber attacks, system failures, etc., etc. That last addition that you see in italics, I put it there in the italics because most organizations that I work with, they actually don't pull in strategic challenges like regulatory changes and emerging risks and competitive landscapes in there, in that kind of more strategic risk domain. They really look more at operational risks, so like business continuity related risks. But this varies from region to region, and it varies also from organization and industry to other organizations in industries. Next slide, please. And so emerging risks, this is the field I'm delving into more and more now, especially after having AI and cyber risk in context of AI, but also other emerging risks. ESG is another one. Yeah, we're talking about growing shortage of skills. We're talking about, and we can flip some of the other screenshots in there, Nat, if you don't mind. You know, you can see here, emerging risks are in the realm of, okay, how do we even know what's around the corner? And that's typically for risk people not the most comfortable space, because like I said, we like to rely on data. We like to give things risk ratings. We like to have a risk register that encompasses everything, and that has a likelihood and an impact rating, and then a residual likelihood and impact, and all those wonderful quantifiable things. But with emerging risks, it becomes more a well, the way to assess it, to even identify the risks, is far more a qualitative process, I find, not so much quantitative. And the main reason is there is no real historic data available. So how do you then approach that sort of thing? Well, you can think about think tanks. The way that I've established with 2 or 3 organizations now in my client base to really monitor for emerging risk, including AI-related, cyber-related, and ESG, is the people who are all the bad news people in the organization. So the risk managers, the DR, disaster recovery managers, you know, security, physical security, cyber security, all those kinds of people who think compliance, sometimes they're not necessarily on the negative side, but anyone who thinks what could happen to us. And pull them together in a room, facilitate a session on really the interrelation between some of those risks. And let's that group think creatively about what's around the corner, and especially physical security people, sometimes also some cybersecurity or information security guys. I find they're a great source of that thinking, because their whole mentality is already about what is actually not obvious. What are the bad people up to? Whereas the people in risk and DR are more of the planning around the known factors. So that's just one approach that I've been able to take. You can see information technology, operational technology, physical security as examples there. And as examples on the screenshots, cyber vulnerabilities of physical assets. So for example, wind farms, or what we saw with pipelines, oil pipelines, with the incidents where those were hacked. Even any lifts or gas supplies in any kind of factory or building, you know, everything hangs off the internet these days. So there's certainly a huge amount of think tanking that you can do to explore those risks, and really also look at the interrelation between them. I've got a new mind mapping exercise that I do with organizations, with executives, where we look at the top low-hanging risks and actually say, how do they interrelate? So if that one and that one happen at the same time, what is then the risk? You know, what's then the likelihood or impact? Especially on the impact side, we look at that, because that seems usually too hard, right? Like you look at your risk register, you see 137 things in there, and it seems mind-boggling to look at the interrelation. But that kind of qualitative approach and that think tanking and interrelation between the risks, I think, is really essential in this particular field. Another couple of techniques there, you see 2 more bullet points, is that focusing on impact reduction and partnering up with other organizations where possible. This always seems a bit scary, especially when we talk about supply chain risk. Originally, supply chain compliance and risk management was always about, do I have a contract with my external vendors? Do I have critical kind of clauses in place, legal ways that I could sue them if they don't supply that service or that particular, for example, incident response process or actual ongoing services. Whilst we now see the suppliers are under so much pressure themselves to also manage all of these risks, that sometimes we have to pull together as partners in a supply chain, rather than thinking the them and us kind of approach. And that will also touch on my next couple of topics. So if we can keep on rolling the slides. There's one couple of examples about ESG, and then the DORA Act. So I thought operational resilience, if those who are not in Europe have never heard about this, I think it's a good thing that that you need to know about. It's a new EU regulation that entered into force in January of this year, and it's basically strengthening IT security in the financial entities like banks, etc. It's not optional anymore for them to say, do we enforce this, or do we actually optimally manage that? No, it's now a regulation. So there's been a lot of movement in the space in Europe on trying to comply with this and to really reduce operational disruptions in that context. Next slide, please. Now, what does DORA cover? That standard, it's ICT risk management, ICT third-party risk management. So third-party risk management, TPRM, which is what I was hinting on earlier, having to really think about contractual provisions, but beyond that, how to work together with those providers. Digital operational resilience testing gets very challenging there because our physical supply chain, at least we could see that. And we could see our goods, our products moving through that. Now, the digital supply chain, imagine a e-commerce site. I'm talking about the Amazons or the eBays or the Temus of this world. Just the idea of how many vendors, how many suppliers are actually involved in keeping that kind of content in the air. We're talking about content providers. We're talking about the actual providers of the goods. We're talking about the secure payment gateways and all those interrelated kind of services, financial aspects. So it's really mind-boggling in the digital supply chain how many of those providers are there. And that's where it gets very challenging also for banks, as you can see. ICT-related incidents, information sharing, between different organizations to have that intelligence, especially on cyber threats, and oversight of critical third-party providers. Now, what is critical? Is that time-sensitive? Is it because it's a material supplier? What is material supply? What does it even mean? How to quantify that? It all starts getting into the same space, actually, as what Natalie was saying. What are the crown jewels of an organization? And luckily, at least that concept, we can start exploring in the context of many ISO standards and topics. So whether you do BCP, operational resilience, or AI management, information security, all those frameworks or standards or topics, they all need to at least, first of all, identify those crown jewels. Yeah, and I'm talking about the real low-hanging fruit of an organization, the key deliverables, the key assets. So at least that's a common factor, and I'm always looking for that because many business units that we're trying to bother with this, with these requests, are kind of workshopped out pretty quickly. So what we need to do is find those common factors, and the conversation about crown jewels is useful in that regard. And here we talk about that in context of third-party vendors as well. Next slide, please. Now, that TPRM topic, the first comment I'd like to make there, the cloud is just someone else's computer. It's no magic. It's not like, oh, there's some perfect provider out there or multiple providers that will keep everything in the air and they're not going to make mistakes and they don't have staffing issues and they don't have certification non-conformities issues. They all are also just organizations with their own issues. And we've seen some examples of that. CrowdStrike is one of them, of course. But, many of my clients think, well, with all of this in mind, whether it's AI management, cybersecurity, we'll just get external vendors to manage all of that because it's too hard. We don't have skilled staff. But now you've got a different type of risk you've attracted, right? To have a third party involved and have them manage critical kind of processes and you not knowing when things start slipping until probably after the event. Whilst when you manage things in-house, you actually can see things slipping and maybe proactively manage them a little bit better. But that's just what I see with organizations around me, that kind of misconception that, oh, we outsource all of this stuff and now we're okay. Yeah, it's still a big challenge. Insourcing it is, of course, a challenge as well. But what I'm trying to say is it also has benefits to do it. And you can see here some other examples of maintaining ongoing stakeholder confidence, managing reputation. Third-party risk management. Yeah, we need to do it because our own clients as organizations are asking for this too. Now, lessons learned in terms of crisis response. You know, when we're talking about third-party risk, them and us approach doesn't work anymore in my view. I've already hinted on that earlier. Yeah, and the physical versus digital supply chain, I've got a few examples there before we go to our Q&A today. Would you be able to flip to the next slide, please? Yeah, this is sort of the physical supply chain, the traditional, you know, where are the goods moving from A to B to C to D, etc. And you can see some natural disasters, political upheaval, of course, counterfeiting of product, those kind of risks, delivery delays, typical kind of physical supply chain issues. And we do have quite a lot of information on that. Well, whilst we go to the next slide, there's a few other comments there also on how we can use AI to optimally manage that supply chain. And this is where things start getting integrated nicely, right? So we now can see those efficiencies in organizations like Amazon, Microsoft, etc. And they're really heavily investing in AI and machine learning to address the multifaceted aspects of supply chains in their business. And especially where it gets mind-boggling in the sense of who are my vendors upstream, you know, downstream, who are my relations, my partnerships. If we get more than one step up or down, we typically don't have visibility. And where AI comes in is to actually really map that out with some success. The problem is always finding the right people to give the right injects to that and to the right context for AI to do its job. And that still requires humans. And that's still, and I've got a little map on showing how many humans are still needed for that. So next slide, please. Couple more examples there on opportunities to identify and manage risks in the supply chain. Also there, not just to optimally manage the supply chain, but also looking at potential supply chain risks. Once again, AI, generative AI, can actually help with supply chain risk management, yeah, and really continuously monitor and analyze data from multiple sources to identify potential risks. And that's, yeah, that can be highly intensive kind of work where AI can actually help with that. And in that context, also predicting potential disruptions. There's multiple platforms out there these days that I know some organizations are subscribing to, where that they monitor actually upcoming potential disruptions on the planet, and you can filter it by your industry or geographical area. Now, without AI, I think that would be a pretty small chance of doing that well, because it is so much data engaged with that. Next slide. So I mentioned human versus AI or tech involvement. You can see here some of the stages. So a risk event, like for example, we mentioned power outages, but let's say we're talking about ports, you know, in major kind of storm events or earthquakes. Then the next stage would be risk and impact assessment. Now, as you see, as we're flowing from left to right, and this is a Deloitte US model, as you see on the left there, sensing the engine, you can see that towards that blue, which is the AI or tech involvement, is where we see more of that success with AI, or where you can rely more on AI. Whereas into the gray, you see a little arrow there, the little black arrow, and that means in the gray zone, it's actually more human involvement. So you can see in the sensing of an engine, for example, of saying, hey, there's something that is going wrong, that actually can be done quite well with AI. Now, as we move through these stages, you can see in the second stage, risk and impact assessment, you actually can see the event monitoring is usually heavily also reliant on human involvement. Network illumination can be in the middle. Preliminary assessment is usually a very human activity, and impact validation as well. Then we move to the next stage, risk mitigation strategies. We're saying that's a fairly heavily human reliant activity to really look at strategies for looking at risk mitigation. And then the last stage there, the risk response. Once again, you see risk minimization and cross-functional mitigation. Both have quite a lot of human involvement as well, especially that risk minimization. So this is really interesting, I find. You could do this on any sector, on any stage of the production process or the risk assessment process, whatever your end-to-end process is, and to say, how much can we actually get AI engaged in this with some success? Next slide, please. Now, the digital supply chain, I already mentioned it, a lot of risks there, and Natalie also highlighted some related to AI, but we can see here some typical ones like ransomware and breaches, vulnerability, supply, cyber attacks, etc., malware, and yeah, it's all a matter of trying to monitor for these and then also have the right controls in place. So it's not an easy job, especially as it's not just your own organization you're monitoring here, it's your supply chain. So there's multiple parties involved on all sides. Next slide. So the people factor remains also in contact with the digital supply chain. You can see here, and please flip through these screenshots, many of these aspects around our systems that we so heavily rely on. Yeah, we're really still looking at all of us being reliant on things like, for example, Microsoft Teams and email, etc. And many times our resilience strategies, our operational resilience is, oh, well, if Teams is down, I'll just use email. Or if email is down, I'll just use Teams. And we can see that heavy reliance on those third-party vendors. So mapping out those risks, including the use of AI in there, is a good idea because we're getting very concentrated risks there. Next slide. All right. From supply chain to value web or resilient hub, once again, a Deloitte chart here, but that's where we're starting to see that organizations need to pull together with their vendors to be able to manage risks well. We saw a recent example of Emirates and Boeing. If you're interested in the aviation sector, I'm very interested in that sector. I love it. But for example, you saw them around the table a short while ago when Boeing had supply chain issues of themselves, and they had shortages, they had pressures on delivering on the order that Emirates had placed. And we're talking in the realm of dozens or even sometimes hundreds of aircraft that are planned to go live and where Emirates have already sold the seats, basically. And instead of the them and us approach, hitting the vendor, in this case, going over the head with a contract, Emirates went around the table with them and to try and really be in partnership with them around these issues and to preempt them, to help them also with some relationship issues that they had with vendors, etc., to be able to manage it as a joint kind of hub rather than seeing it as a them and us approach. Next slide. The last slide here, that's something I found very interesting as well. When we talk about operational resilience, we always think about our own organization, our own limitations, our own lack of AI skilled staff, our own lack of cyber experts, for example. What I saw as a very successful initiative, it's quite a while ago that I was engaged with this, but this is through an organization, the Asia Disaster Preparedness Center. They actually did, they conducted a couple of studies and projects with multiple companies in a physical geographical area. So let's say an industry park somewhere far away from the nearest city. And they said, okay, how can we all work together? We're all in different sectors, but how can we work together to be able to manage risk together, especially when there's a disaster event? Who has, for example, great spare generators? Who has great firefighting capability? Who has good physical security? Who has a good medical team on site? And it was one of those situations where they all started looking at certain risks, how they could interact and help each other out. And this is when things go wrong. And I mentioned AI can go wrong too. What is then your approach? Can you do that with this kind of physical approach, or is it more like a great comms plan, for example, to talk to your stakeholders? So I think in a nutshell, before we go to Q&A right now, is the necessity of organizations to pull together in this context of AI and cyber risk, because it is just not manageable on your own, I think, in this world anymore. All right, I'm pretty happy to open up for questions. Jetmir, do you have some that are burning, or would you be able to ask Natalie or myself?
We have plenty of questions. I don't think that we will have the time to cover them all, but I tried to pick a few of them. So we'll start with an easy one. What is the boundary between AI, ML, and IoT?
Well, the boundaries, AI is basically the umbrella approach where machine learning is basically a subset of the whole artificial intelligence field, which where machine learning really focuses more on a deep learning approach and hidden layers, more mimicking the human brain. And I don't know, what was the other question? IoT or OT, where you have, of course, the artificial intelligence, the sensors that can act and that can really process the data that comes in from the sensors and can process that on a pretty self-related form, where usually the form that sensors and stuff like is the more very narrow AI, which only does input and output generation, where you look at machine learning is really mimicking the human brain and more basically more advanced thinking levels, where it's not really thinking yet like in a human brain, because that's the general AI, which is not in operation yet at the moment. So that's not still a theoretical concept at the moment.
Thank you. Another question asks, what is the enforceable or jurisdictional power that international legal bodies to ensure that straight adherence against data breach and law publication of the data within developer system across different countries and regions globally?
Okay, that's a very complicated question. I'm going to see if I understand the question. So basically, is what is the enforcement from a global level into the specific regions related to artificial intelligence? Is that the question, Yetmir?
Yes.
Yeah. The thing, and from a European perspective, I'm now talking, of course, we have the European EU AI Act, which will put on some emphasis on the use of artificial intelligence, where they work with different risk categories as well, high impact risk, low impact, etc., where the EU AI Act is really based on those high risk AI usage and development, to have that impact assessment and risk assessment in place. When it becomes into force, and they're still working on really on how they will enforce it, because there will be an AI committee on a European level as well that will come with some guidance and with some procedures that you will need to adhere to. So the first thing that that all European companies that are currently developing or using AI, which are basically all the organizations in Europe, should have already done an AI literacy training. So if I look at the organizations that I support, there's still a lot of them that say like AI literacy, let's follow a YouTube movie and we're done and dusted, but that's not what the EU AI Act entails. It's really understanding the impact and the consequences and the risks. So to answer the question on will there be fines and will there be things like that, at this moment, I cannot answer that yet because it's not properly known. So, but I do assume that it will be something like NIS2, DORA, and GDPR, because it all belongs in the same digital package that Europe wants to roll out over the countries. But that's from a European perspective spoken. Looking at the US, yes, companies that want to do business in Europe, either they're from the US or from Asia, it doesn't really matter, or from Africa, they need to adhere to the EU AI Act, and that will come with some issues. And that's why a lot of American companies are now relying on the new Trump administration in hoping that those laws and regulations will be tempered down a little bit. But on the fines, I cannot say anything yet. I don't know if you have another opinion, Rinske.
No real precedents yet on that topic. It's all very new. Most organizations are really looking at this point at implementing best practice and not doing it purely for regulatory requirements. So yeah, it's all changing like really rapidly, I think. Yeah. Any other questions, Yetmir?
Thank you. I think that we will take one last question. Auditing risk management and business continuity, or ISMS, is straightforward, but auditing AI system is quite impossible. Software and training data, etc. What is your opinion? Do you agree with this?
I can say a quick comment and then I'll hand it back to Natalie, because you're probably quite involved with the implementation part. I can say if you can audit ISO 27001, I believe there's also definitely good opportunities and options to audit AI management. Yeah, as a management system especially, I don't think that's impossible at all. It's written as a auditable, certifiable standard. There's tangible controls in there that you can consider. It's not vague, you know, like some of the other standards around. So yeah, I think it's definitely something that organizations will take up. I know there's certification bodies that already are doing it. Natalie, you were asking about that earlier. MSCCB, for example, have AI management as an auditable, certifiable kind of standard. So it's certainly a topic that organizations are doing. And I see a lot of movement towards being a first, what do you call that? First entrance or first starter in this field in their industry. So organizations go, hey, I actually have AI management certification, whilst my competitors are not there yet. So it is a commercial opportunity for many of them, I think. Any other ideas, Natalie, that you think?
Yeah, I agree on the management system perspective. So I'm not really in agreement that auditing risk management is straightforward, because you really need to understand where they found the risks and if it's a template, and you really need to dive deep into the controls, etc. But that's a different discussion. So for the management system, I do think it's doable. Because it doesn't really, like an ISO 27001, necessarily goes into the technical detail of the AI system. Where an ISO 27001 is also not an assurance audit, is it 42001 also not an assurance audit? So you will not get into the itty-gritty technical detail on what is the algorithm and how, what is the registry that is used and how does it work and those kind of things. If you really want to have your AI, the product, the service certified, I don't even think that there's already a product AI ISO standard out there. But if you really want to dive into the technical detail and to see is it being set up properly, etc., what will help is, of course, the technical documentation that is necessary to be created from out of the standard, but also from out of the EU AI Act, that will help you on that transparency and the understandability of the system. But again, for some stuff like algorithms, you will need to be tech savvy and have data knowledge to understand what's written there. It's the same if they would ask me to build a bridge, for example. Yeah, I can see if the bridge is solid, but I have no idea how you would calculate that the bridge is okay. Which is the same thing with an artificial intelligence system, to really look at the security measures, the setup of the system, and etc. That would require a different skill set than auditing a management system. Like it's different from a cybersecurity audit and an ISO 27000 audit. So that will be the same thing, which are two complete different skill sets, in my opinion.
Thank you, Natalie and Rinske, for delivering this highly informative webinar. Unfortunately, we do not have any time left to cover all of the questions that the audience has asked, but we will make sure to publish them on the next issue of the PCB magazine, so make sure to subscribe to that. Furthermore, please be informed that this session has been recorded and will be posted on our website and YouTube channel along with the slides of the presentation, as well as everyone who attended this webinar for more than 60% will receive the attestation of webinar completion worth 1 CPD credit within 7 days from today. So thank you all. See you for the next webinar.